And I'll call the meeting to order. The first items is items for commission action. Consider proclaiming January 17th, 2021 as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Day. Kelly, do you want to give us some background?
Yes, the Diversity Task Force is working on putting on their annual event that they do for Martin Luther King Jr. Day. And this year they're doing a virtual one. And so they will be utilizing the clip of reading the proclamation as part of that video. And we will launch that on our Facebook page and encourage all our citizens to watch that.
Okay. So, commissioners, do you have any questions concerning the proclamation?
I do not.
Commissioner?
I do not.
Zissi? Okay. With that, then I'll entertain a motion.
I move to proclaim January 17th, 2021 as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Day and authorize the mayor to sign the proclamation.
Okay.
Commissioner Isusi, seconds.
Okay, I have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried. With that, then, I will read the proclamation. Proclamation 2021 honoring Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Whereas the 15th day of January is the birthday anniversary of the late Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And whereas Dr. King stood before the entire world as a man of peace, champion of human dignity, and an example of love and brotherhood. And whereas the citizens of Independence do recognize Dr. King's contribution to the good of all humankind, and they do desire to perpetuate and implement the ideals expressed in his dream of peace and harmony among all God's children. Now, therefore, I, Leonard Kaflish, Mayor of the City of Independence, do hereby proclaim the day of January 17th, 2021, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Commemoration Day, and urge that every citizen of Independence join me in extending recognition and honor to the memory of this great leader of humankind by watching the local virtual celebration, King's Vision, the urgency of creating the beloved community, on Sunday, January 17th, 2021 at 3 p.m. In witness thereof, I have hereunto set my hand and caused the seal of the City of Independence, Kansas, to be affixed this day, January 17th, 2021. Leonard Kaflish, Mayor of Independence. So, he is quite an example for us to follow and to encourage our youth and to continue on the mission of peace and harmony among all people. So it's an honor to be able to present the proclamation to the citizens of Independence. So with that, the next item on our agenda, item B, is consider chemical bids for the water treatment plant.
Mayor, this is the annual bids we receive every year that sets the prices for the chemicals that are utilized at the water treatment plant.
I had a question on the bids. There are two bidders that had the same price, and I notice as we're talking about the motion, it says to award the low bid. Has that been determined since Brendig, Southwest, and Hawkins had the same bid on muriatic acid?
Terry actually prepared this, and he's out of the office. David, do you know the answer to that question?
I do not know the answer, Leonard. I do not know. I would assume he's going with, since the other bid is lower, and that's how he broke the tie.
So he's looking, the other vendor also bid the powdered activated carbon, and he was low on it, so it's unclear whether
Yes.
Hawkins had three products they were low on, whether it would change to the 2 to 2, or 3 and 1.
If you'd like, you could table it and we can find that out.
Or, since we're dealing with this, I'm just looking at the wording of our motion so that it's clear. Should we make our motion then identifying that the award of the muriatic acid would be at the pleasure of the director?
Yeah, that would be fine with staff.
Because with timing and everything, it would be
Yeah.
best to go on.
Yeah.
And I just want to make
Yeah.
sure we're covered in our motion, actually what the action would take place.
Yeah. Yep. That's good.
So
Yeah.
I don't think it's worth bringing back at a later date and losing the timing that, but it does need to be clarified for our records. So,
Okay.
okay? Commissioners, Commissioner Hayes, do you have any questions?
No, I'm ready to make that motion.
Okay, Commissioner Yususi, do you have any questions?
I'm good also.
Okay, then with no further questions, I'll call for a motion.
I move to approve the low bid for chemicals for the water treatment plant for use in 2020-21, with the exception of muriatic acid, which will be assigned to the low bid at the director's discretion.
Okay, we have a motion. Do I have a second?
Commissioner Susi, seconds.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried. Okay. Next item with discussions. Item A, discuss future city facilities. Okay. Kelly, when we discussed earlier, you wanted to give kind of an update on the discussion of the background of the Public Works facility. Did you want to?
Yes, I just wanted to let you know that we are working on that. Right now, several of the Public Works facilities are not in the best of shape. We would like to look at putting all of those departments into one facility that would allow us to have efficiencies in utilizing not only the infrastructure in the building, having, one break room and sets of bathrooms, lockers, things like that, but also to facilitate our departments working together, because that is one thing that we are trying to change our culture into. Our employees are all city employees. They're not employees of just specific departments. And we wanted to encourage them to work together to best utilize our resources. And that would include not only personnel, but equipment or whatever they have, and encourage that. And all of our leadership team is totally behind that concept, and that's what we're trying to do. And one thing we saw is something we need to address. And I know when you guys did your commission tours, you toured those facilities, and you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
And we do need to do something about that, so we are working on that. And we'll bring more information to you on that as we gather it. John, our new city engineer, is actually taking that on and working on that for us. And we're really excited about that potential future project.
Good. I know when we initially started discussing of the Public Works facility, we didn't have that unity of a Director of Public Works. I guess that
Yes.
is a title. And now with that position, it does give us a lot of opportunities to look at consolidation and improvement of services. So it's going to be exciting to see that develop.
Yes, we're very excited about it. And it's just, I think we have the right team to get it done, and we can't wait to see what they can accomplish.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
The next would be Commissioner Hayes. Do you want to begin the discussion? And you have some slides prepared.
Yes, please. And thank you for this opportunity to share this information with you. As I discussed with you at the November 19th meeting, I had prepared a cost analysis for Phase 2 City Hall renovation. And while I think it's a relevant cost analysis, there are elements that I don't have data on, and I was going to share this with you as a starting point for a cost discussion, because as we go forward, I do want to make sure I understand the relevance of the costs and the available cost data that we have, and if we could share that, that might help us make an informed decision. So this is what I've prepared today. It's just a cost comparison of the Phase 2 information that we received from Trainer on November the 11th, and some cost data that was shared previously in other city commission discussions that are relevant to this conversation. And then we'll see where the conversation goes from there. But if you could advance to the first slide, I just have some of the base for this conversation is that there are elements of cost that we have identified, including the construction cost for Phase 2, the historic tax credit information. We had some examples run for us for debt service. We have some estimates of annual operating cost, and we have some estimates of equipment replacement costs that will be utilized in this analysis. There are other elements of costs that we don't have, and so as we get to that point of conversation, hopefully we'll have a list of missing cost elements by the time we end this meeting that could be relevant and added to this analysis. Next slide. So the Phase 2 costs include the 1916 City Hall being completed, ready for occupancy, construction of the fire and EMS structure, an additional apparatus bay, and design and administrative costs to support all of that. It doesn't include Phase 1 renovation costs. Next slide. So this is the detail on that Trainer information. It sums to $6,572,635. So I'll be probably saying something like $6.5 million throughout the discussion today. Next slide. So we talked about how well, there are additional costs associated with creating a bond, and so within the bond calculation that is summarized later in this presentation, there are costs in addition to the building costs that are bond preparation fees and other premiums and discounts on bonds that are part of that creation of a bond in the process of doing so. So I left that like the bond counsel prepared it, just acknowledging that there are some fees in there and stuff that is part of the bond process. There's also historical tax credit, and while the historical tax credit is valued has a face value, there is also a market value for historic tax credits. So I chose to use in this analysis the cash value to the City of Independence, and I got a range from $722,500 to $866,000 of cash value. So for the analysis, I chose the midpoint between those two because I don't have a way to assign probability to any the probability of occurrence of any one of those dollars within the range. So I chose the midpoint for this analysis. Next slide. And the bond itself, this is another clarification on this particular cost element, and that is the average bond debt payment can be structured to satisfy the needs of the city, and we can move payments around. We can move interest payments forward or backwards in time. We can move principal payments forward or backwards in time, and the specific time for starting of payments can be delayed. And tax-free municipal bonds have some advantages, but they also have some restrictions, so we have to pay attention to that. But ultimately, for this analysis, I chose the total cost for the debt and divided it by the term in years so I could annualize the cost of indebtedness. So while it doesn't relate the average debt doesn't relate specifically to any year, it does relate to the total in terms of the number of years that the bond is active. Next slide. So a 20-year bond analysis was used for the following portion of the presentation. Raymond James prepared this estimate of cost for us on December the 3rd. And that's important because for it to be relevant, because things change in the marketplace, we have to have something that's relatively close in time. So I'd say that it's relevant to the conversation. So let's go forward one more slide. So the total cost of the bond, principal and interest for the 20-year bond was $8.7 million, and the average annual debt payment then for 20 years is just $8.7 million divided by 20. So that's the $436,000 value you see there. Also, the historic tax credit midpoint I mentioned earlier, if you divide that by 20, you get an average annual savings from tax credit of $39,700. And so the annual, if we use that tax credit to modify the cost of debt by subtracting it, the average annual debt payment less the tax credit is $396,000. So, and just as a note, the debt includes, that $8.7 million includes $2.7 million worth of interest. Next slide. So, saving the cost of debt for just a moment, I want to talk about annual operating costs. So this is a part of the calculation that's very important, as it is the perceived savings for moving back into the 1916 City Hall building is that we have demonstrated costs, actual costs for 2014 and 2015 that were about $108,000 or $109,000 a year for operating costs, which is which is different from what we're currently experiencing. And we'll get to that in a minute. There are some estimations in operating costs that were shared with us in June of 2016 as we were looking at different structure sizes and changes to the 1916 City Hall building. One of the cost elements that was shared there was the 1916 City Hall building plus an additional space to that building for fire department at that point in time was valued at $139,000 a year for just the 1916 City Hall building plus the addition. And in that same analysis, a cost estimate was shared with us for operating costs if we added to the 1916 City Hall building an additional building for public safety. That would include the fire department, the EMS, and the police department. At that time, the estimate was $209,500 for all of public safety to be separate. So just using the midpoint between those two, if fire and EMS is by itself, it would be perhaps half that difference between the two. So I'm going to use the midpoint for this particular cost analysis. The midpoint between 139 and 209, which is $174,000. There are some costs that I don't know, and so I just listed the ones I am aware that I don't know of, and that is if there's costs for relocation or if there's costs for furniture and fixtures, as we move to a new space. I don't know what that is. And to some degree, I haven't really researched to what degree fitting the 1916 City Hall building is completed within the $6.5 million estimate. So we can talk about that later. Next slide. So if we sum the two of those costs for the 1916 Phase 2 renovation, the debt service at $396,000 and the cost of operations estimated at $174,000, you get a total of $570,000 per year for the cost of operations. The cost of occupancy of the 1916 City Hall building. Go ahead. Next slide.
And that includes the fire EMS building too?
Yes.
Or just that
Includes
1916?
includes the implementation, I guess, of Phase 2.
Okay.
This slide is the temporary City Hall occupancy. We have some experience now with that building, and so we have utilized that experience to establish a 2021 budget of $414,000 for operating costs in that building. Additional costs, though, that aren't budgeted that we expect to have are irregular maintenance costs that will be overhaul and replacement of capital equipment and a roof replacement. So those are listed there, and the year that they're anticipated to be happening. But anyway, the total of the irregular costs on the list are $656,000 worth of replacement costs over the life of the or the term of the debt. If we annualize that number, and this is not unlike having an account accrual for potential irregular maintenance, it would be about $32,800 a year. One of those, I'll just continue then. Other costs or revenues not considered in this analysis, there's no income from rentals or attempt to rationalize rental income. There's no attempt to rationalize cost savings by additional investments. There's no rationalization for, what might be, how we might adjust these costs for a power factor or any other savings that might be accrued by leaning into that kind of information. That's not included. Next slide. So the cost comparison then for building D, I have on this one, this is the temporary City Hall building, is the $414,000 for estimated operating costs plus the annual irregular expenses for capital equipment replacement is a total of $447,000. And we already looked at the 1916 Phase 2 implementation with the cost of debt service plus operating cost at $570,000. So what I'm seeing is an increase in cost for the first 20 years of debt service of $123,000, almost $124,000 a year, or about $2.4 million over the life of the 20-year bond. I also had, next slide, I also had access to a 10-year bond analysis, so I can run through that real quick. Some of these are slides that have been repeated just to make this particular portion complete. So the next one is the next slide, please, is this average bond payment calculation. Total bond payment for a 10-year bond, $7.4 million or $746,000 a year. Historic tax credit midpoint is annualized is $79,000 in savings per year if we annualize that over a 10-year period. So the average annual debt payment is the difference between those two at $667,000. And the total interest on a 10-year debt is $1.3 million. Next slide. You've seen this one before. This is just that annual operating cost estimate for Phase 2 implementation. Next. So the sum of those two costs is $841,000. And it's, if you're going to pay off more money per year, that's natural that it would be more debt service in 10 years annually than it would be if you had financed it for longer. Next slide. You've seen this one before. This is just an estimate of annual operating costs for the temporary building D. So this comparison then is the $447,000 for temporary city hall compared to the $841,000 for Phase 2 implementation. That's an annual cost increase to the city of $394,000 or $3,900,000 over the life of the bond, the term of the bond. So that is where I am at. I think the next slide is questions. Am I right? So where I'm at and what I'm asking for is these cost elements that I've identified so far are leading me to a conclusion thus far that cost effectively, in terms of how much the city is paying out, that the indebtedness from the bonds makes it not cost effective to proceed. So if that's the case, then if we do proceed, it won't be because we're trying to be cost effective. It's going to be for other reasons. That's where I'm at right now. And so what I want to do is I want to proceed by answering what questions you have of the analysis thus far, and then hopefully making a list of questions that we can give to Kelly to answer for us with regard to cost or other direction. And then we can go from there, and hopefully we can finish this with the relevant questions to be answered. So what questions do you have, gentlemen, that I might help clarify either with regard to the analysis itself or with methodology?
Commissioner Ususi, do you have any questions?
Yes, I do. In the information that you presented, there's no mention of any renovation to turn a hospital into a city office facility in any of those slides that I've seen here on paper. And there was always a plan to spend anywhere from $3.4 or $5 million and up to do renovation to make the space more, the building itself more office, more efficiency for offices. And that's not included in there. My other concern is that, we've had a committee steering committee put together by previous commissioners, which I was not a part of, but I was a part of the steering committee along with many others, including yourself. And when all the information was presented to us and the analysis was given to us, we came to the conclusion, and I did not hear anyone object to the what was stated that in the interest of the city, being the burden of the operational and maintenance cost of the temporary building D, that it was in the best interest of the city to unload the building. The building has great value, and it should be marketed. We should be having our local government officials, our state officials, and our federal officials determined to market that building and move it down the road. There was no objection to that. There was consensus as far as building a public safety building. There was also some consensus in building a facility for what we consider the temporary apparatus bay, which is now permanent, is on the grounds now. Building Plan B was also an option that was looked at, but that was not the one that was decided. But this brings up a lot of ill feeling that was stirred up in the community, and it was stirred up by the method and the, I'm trying to be nice here, the sleight of hand that was used to put City Hall where it currently is now. And this cost one city manager his job, and it also cost us the opportunity to turn the facility to another entity that would have provided 25 jobs at $45,000 a year, put the building back on the tax rolls at that time with a $205,000 taxes on that particular property, in addition to providing us sewer and water income feeds from the use of that facilities. The increase in jobs would have trickled down and provided more jobs and other services that would have supported that. So we've kind of lost that by the attempt by one to circumvent what he thought would be best in his own interest, not the city as a whole. And this just opens up a lot of wounds. We've already gone through this with the steering committee. We didn't have any good options. We weren't given a price tag as to what, as a dollar amount, as to what our limits were to be. The size of the building continued to grow because there were no limits set on it. And the growth and the size of the building was determined by what the city administration at that time felt as they wanted. So we're opening up a can of worms here. There were other reasons to renovate the 1916 facility. First of all, it was an anchor to downtown. Mr. Hogshead, who was a former commissioner, expressed his support for keeping that anchor downtown because it drew people to the downtown area. It was centrally located. The building was solid as a rock. It was structurally sound, good bones. The building itself had been neglected of any major renovation for a good number of years, and you can debate who and why and all that. It's immaterial. It's in the past. Can't change that. But it has intangible values that override and put it up near the top of the list as what we were trying to do. In my own personal opinion, it made sense to build a facility onto the temporary apparatus bay and house fire and EMS personnel there. They're the ones that stay overnight. They're the ones that need accommodating facilities. That would make available plenty of room in the 1916 City Hall to accommodate city staff and police operations. We've also made accommodations to make room for everyone in city administration, independent housing authority, plus having other spaces available for break rooms and to make it a complete finished structure that will get us a lot further down the road. So to me, it's just we're rehashing something that's been rehashed, been looked at for a good number of years, and the $13 and the $16 million cost that came out of the steering committee, that was just not acceptable to me, and it never has been, and it never will be. And I think I think the route we are going now is a very good, sound reason to move forward. I do not have a problem with it. I do have a problem with, I don't know who is behind this, but be careful where you tread. We have moved past that point, and it's time for us to put this behind us, move forward, and because we have other pressing issues that we need to face. So I'll stop there for now, but I may come back and add more later. Thank you.
May I summarize then for just a moment? Two cost elements that you mentioned are estimated renovation costs for the temporary City Hall building and marketing and selling, a selling price for the building D. Those two cost elements I hear. Was there any other element of cost that you mentioned there?
No, the market price of the facility has actually not been determined. I'm not sure what the building was appraised for. I was thinking somewhere around $4 million to $4.1 million at one time. I don't know where that evaluation stands, but the building itself was a restricted gift with $500,000. $500,000 has already been spent. It's been spent on ambulatory services. So that money's gone.
Are you saying that you want into this proposal included those costs, or are you saying you're not interested in pursuing any more?
The proposals do not indicate any of those costs. It's hard to come up with a finalized answer without knowing that. In my own opinion, we're just continuing to beat a dead horse down the road, pardon the expression. I'm perfectly content to move forward with phase 2, which includes a 1.6 facility for fire and EMS, and completed phase 2, the renovation of the 1916 City Hall. That's my own opinion.
Thank you. Mayor?
Yeah, to compare the two, you do need to look at renovation costs of Building D. Eventually, the space would be renovated. And we had costs prepared by Trainer, two different figures. One was 3.5 million, and the other was almost 9, depending on the extent of the renovation. When you get those costs into looking at an operation and funding, utilities, the cost to stay at Building D gets quite a bit higher. I had contacted a developer that has worked on similar projects, commercial, and they have a bond agent that worked with them too. The last two slides that I included were prepared by them that shows the similar preparation, one without the renovation and one with the renovation of Building D. the information that I had got from other submittals we had reviewed. When we started this, you were mentioning about the history of how we got there. That's why I included that for information. Where we had began with the option 5 that talked about relocating City Hall to the 800 West Main. It had renovation costs of $4.8 million, and with the addition of the bay, and then, you know, with this figure, it came up 148 or 143,000 annual operating expense in Building D, and we've seen that that wasn't the case. Also, through the cycle up until this point, funding had been similar. Projected budget at one time, operating expense was 166,500. So that's where, when we're looking at it, and at the time there was not much information on where we would be at 1916 building. So that's why I contacted someone that would have experience in that. And in the slide without the renovation, for Building D, utilities were $6.3 million over 15 years, $350,000 for roof, $325,000 for maintenance, boiler, chiller. General was $750,000, or the total came down to $7.8 million, where with the 1916 building renovation at 4.5 or $4,516,560,000, then using a tax credit of $947,500. Utilities over 15 years was $1,350,000. Then general maintenance was $225,000, allowing $300,000 sale of Building D. The actual cost projected to $7,050,135. So in that case, there was about $750,000 difference. That Building D came up cheaper, but then when you add in, it's on down. That slide shows those figures. The last one, and it shows 25-year debt service. They would have Building D at $5,425,000 and 1916 building at $4,618,166. If you the 25-year debt service over 15, it's $7,800,000 to $7,745,221. The last slide looking at the same thing, only it added in the renovation costs to the the Building D of $3,332,201. The bottom line in that came to $9,707,201 as opposed to $7,050,135,000. So, you know, as you look at a 10-year, 25-year service over 10 years is $7,582,201 for Building D and $4,618,162 for 1916 building, or over 15 years, Building D is $907,201, and building, the 1916 building is $7,074,221. So, you know, we always get numbers, but in the bottom line, looking at the utilization, considering Building D, the efficiency, as it is, the efficiency of the layout, to use it as is not conducive. Eventually, it's going to be renovated, and we need to, as we consider that, that's why I contacted them to see how this would all play out. When we look at the living quarters for fire EMS in Building D, the distance that they travel to the apparatus bay, one of the hazards that's putting emergency services like that on the second floor, responding downstairs, puts a risk. It's very seldom that you'll see a new fire EMS facility on 2 levels. But then in inclement weather, responding with ice, snow, rain from Building D to the apparatus bay is an issue. Then the excessive or excess square footage we have, I think 10,000 was leased space, and then there was 7,300 in the study from Trainer that was unassigned. So we've got 17,000 square feet that is not needed, but then that's not taken in consideration with the program change that we were able to incorporate police and administration in a smaller space. That excess square footage could increase, but the opportunity for turning a hospital building to another agency to provide jobs for Independence is still a possibility that's hard to factor in to a table. We did have that one firm with mental health that was interested in it. I'm heard of other state agencies that could be looking at possible medical space. So we have a lot of numbers that we just can kind of come up with different figures, you know, similar to what you've prepared quite extensively. Here's another set of numbers, but you know, I think what is best. We've had the committee that reviewed it, as Lewis highlighted, recommendations coming to the book. We've talked about it for so long, and we went into a direction to shift horses now and go back. We're just going to prolong the inevitable and look at increased costs no matter which way we go. If we renovate Building D, we're looking at increased cost. If we delay and the renovation of the 1916 building, we're going to be looking at increased costs. You know, with the renovated plan, we know that there's more than enough room. You know, our spaces in the 1916 building were quite generous. We have, you know, even a courtroom planned in there, and I think it works very comfortable. I know that's one feature that's hard to look at a value, but you know, with the exterior windows for office space in the 1916 compared to some of the areas without daylight, without office, working in that environment is a little different. But where we've come a long ways, you know, from looking at 3 renovations or 2 renovations of 1916, renovating the Building D, and now going back with the housing unit on the apparatus bay and renovation of 1916 City Hall. I don't think additional study is going to get us any closer to a solution, because the numbers can go anywhere we want. But what's best is to make a decision and go forward. And I think we started the decision, and in my opinion, we need to continue on. We need to renovate 1916 building for our offices and add a living quarters to the temporary apparatus bay and market market building D to find a buyer that would bring in the additional jobs and positions to Independence.
Mayor, this is Commissioner Yashewski. May I make an additional comment?
Yes.
Yes. Okay, I was looking at the cost comparison on Building D at $447,050, and this is based on a 20-year annual cost, additional cost to the city. 1916 City Hall Phase 2, total $570,000, 825 cents. In year 21, on Phase 19, on 1916 City Hall Phase 2, we will be down to an estimated annual operating cost of $174,250. In year 21 on Building D, we will still be paying $447,050. We're planning to be in Building D more than 20 years. I'm making an assumption here. Correct?
Oh, are you asking me, Commissioner?
I'm just saying, is that correct? Is what I'm saying, does that make sense to you gentlemen?
Yeah, with the decision, either building we would be in beyond 21 years.
Yes.
So,
This is going to get us down the road for many, 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 many years.
let me just clarify. I'm not suggesting that at all. I don't particularly think that the solution is to perpetually stay in the same cost structure that we are in 2021. I think there's alternatives that have yet to be analyzed that would change the cost structure by year 21. So that's not part of this cost analysis. Effectively, what I'm saying is that in the next 20 years, based on these costs, that the alternatives are the cost-effective alternative is yet to be identified. But I still have some cost elements that both of you gentlemen have elevated today that have yet to be dollarized, and therefore they're not part of the analysis. So I'm not saying that we will be in Building D for the next 20 or 30 years. I'm saying that the cost analysis thus far suggests that we don't have a cost-effective choice yet based on these numbers. Now, I haven't had a chance to look at the additional content that Mayor Kaflish added. So that is part of my continued concern, is that there are cost estimates that are now on the table here that I haven't seen until just a moment ago. And I don't know why, possibly just not lack of research. I'll take a look at those, and possibly the answer to my questions is within those. So to answer your question, do I expect that we will be in the same, in building in the temporary city hall and have the same exact cost structure 21 years from now compared to today? I would say that's very unlikely. So if this is a pause, then I've got some cost elements before me in this particular analysis that Mayor Kaflish added that I haven't seen. So those are new and informative, and those are part of this cost analysis, this cost justification. They are our cost elements for perceived renovations that need to be done in Building D that are in the millions of dollars that I would like to test to see whether they are still relevant. And then there's the cost, the unknown cost to market the building and use it to or even use it as an economic development draw for businesses to move to a business perhaps, or businesses to move to Independence. We don't have a lot of control over what the marketplace is doing for buildings of this size in southeast Kansas, so that would, that'd be one of those that we would have to get some expertise to weigh in on. One of the things that we probably could use if we wish to just complete the cost analysis is this one thing that we do have a lot of control over, and therefore we could get a cost estimate on, is demolition of the building, and I don't have that either. So I would add that to the list of costs that we haven't defined yet. But there's also, and I haven't heard this mentioned so far, but the cost of vacant operation or the cost of ownership of the unoccupied Building D and what those costs are. I don't have the cost of vacant operation. So if we are concurrently in the Phase 2 building and also own the Building D location, how much that vacant operation or the cost of ownership while we are marketing it, I don't have a value for that. So that's one that still remains undefined. What other costs, gentlemen, other than those that you presented, might be part of this answer for me?
I guess, is the effectiveness of additional information going to change our opinion that we need to renovate 1916 building, build the apparatus facility, build onto the apparatus bay and sell Building D? I don't think any additional information will change my opinion. We're just delaying what needs to be done. We need to renovate 1916 building, move into it, and market Building D and complete the fire EMS facility. The numbers are going to go, I don't think there'll only be a consistent determination on numbers. It's how you approach it and how the numbers end. You can see from the direction that you went, the direction that the developer presented with knowledge of buildings of these types and maintenance, we're getting different results. So where is the right result? software is going to be, we've seen presentations up until the point of emergency relocating to Building D, that by the projection of $143,000 operating expense, that is 413. So, I think we need to, we can't keep staying in limbo. We've got to make a decision, right or wrong. We've got to make a decision and go for it. The study that was done by the committee was quite thorough, gave us a direction. Since then, we've had an additional area study. We've actually got a renovation plan for 1916 building and see that our offices will fit where we assume they wouldn't. We've got a workable plan that actually increased in size for fire EMS from first presentation. I think aggressively marketing Building D is what we need to do now, making contacts with back with the initial interested party to see if that can be rekindled, as well as a couple other federal agencies. So that's, again, I know we've got 3 opinions possibly, but we need to go forward.
Mayor,
Yes, Commissioner.
this is Commissioner Isusi. May I interject something?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. My take is that I do believe we need to continue to move forward. The building, it's served. It's been a blessing, and it's been like a bad dream. The building itself initially didn't cost us anything. We had restrictions on it, and we got $500,000 out of it. Unfortunately, with an estimated O&M of $143,000, and we were spending on average $432,000, by the end of 2020, we will have spent somewhere north of $2.1 million for O&M at temporary Building D. We left a building that, according to the figures of 2015, the O&M for that building was under $110,000. So we've incurred roughly $300,000 in additional cost, over $300,000 in additional cost that we hadn't planned for, that we've been paying on that building. So we've already spent $2.1 million that's gone. That's gone. That $300,000 plus came from somewhere else to make those payments to keep temporary Building D open. And this has gone on long enough. I think we have a good plan in front of us, a $1.6 million, which gives the fire and EMS personnel a good facility for them to operate out of, and it ties into an existing apparatus bay that has already been built, completed on site, and the renovation of the 1916 City Hall with the floor plan that we got from Trainer, with city staff buying into. I think it's a good floor plan. It accommodates the needs of city administration and the police. I think it's a good plan, and we can continue to go back and forth, which is what city government is normally good about. But no, we've already been down this road. It's time to continue to move forward, and I'm in agreement. Let's move forward. Let's get this project completed, and let's move on to something else. We have other fish that need to be fried. Thank you.
So additional information is not going to change your opinion, Commissioner Eustace?
No, it's not. The information provided, it's going to vary, and it can take you wherever you determine you wanted it to take you. It's all subjective.
Okay.
Let's move forward with what we've got. It's a huge alternative, better than what we were initially looking at. A $16 million project with $8 million in interest accrued on that. This is a far better solution to what we were looking at, and this is the hand that we were dealt, and we've made the best possible decisions that we could, considering what we were dealing with. And my point is, let's continue to move forward and let's move on. We're just bringing up past history.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
That's my sentiment. If you want to do further study, you're welcome to, but
Well, thank you for the time this morning. Of course, I appreciate your input on this. It's important for me then to note that while there are historical numbers and there are stories about values that have been established and then proven to be unnecessary or otherwise unapplicable, what I was trying to do was to establish the numbers that are applicable to this particular decision, which is the Phase 2 project as we are going forward. And I was trying to establish what the right decision cost-wise was. Right or wrong, I would have preferred to have been right with regard to the cost, and I don't know what that is, because it would take some time, and therefore to establish what the market value of Building D is. It will take some time to establish what those other costs that we have identified are. And so we're not going to get an analysis of cost effectiveness for this particular decision. One of the things that I had hoped also is that while we were in this process of taking a look at programmatic space and the value or the cost of new construction, that we would also discuss not only our current needs of the city, but the future needs of the city. And I pointed this out in a presentation I made to you in February of 2018, and that is that while I served on the City Hall Task Force and was part of that consensus building process, I also understood the limitations of a consensus building process and how it had foisted upon no less responsibility for the commission to determine what was the cost-effective way to move forward while utilizing the information and the priorities that were brought forth within the task force's work. I also elevated in that presentation that I thought the City Hall of the future would be more agile, that it would be able to respond to the needs of the future city. And in that regard, I thought it would be in some way scalable. Therefore, acknowledging that while we love the City of Independence, and while the people who live here are very important to us, the trend lines that are established by our recent history say that we are getting smaller and we are losing value. And so over time, if those trend lines continue, then we should also prepare for that by setting in place a structure of city government that can also follow that trend and therefore be smaller and less expensive. By putting additional structures in place, we are actually increasing the city's footprint with in this regard over where we had started out and were capable of operating in the year 2015. So with that said, and if we just want to say that it looks to me, I'll just say it looks to me like this is not necessarily a cost-effective solution, and it doesn't necessarily address the future needs of the city. It is one alternative, and I am, of course, only one vote. So I'm disappointed, therefore, in the lack of information with regard to cost, and I prefer to finish the analysis and test these assumptions, but if that is not going to happen collectively, then I probably will continue to work on it individually so that I feel like I can make an informed decision. But thank you for your time this morning. I appreciate your indulgence.
And your work was detailed. Appreciate seeing
Thank
it.
you. Thank you. There was a lot of hard work that went into that. I'm glad we were able to, this is Commissioner Susi, I'm glad we were able to voice our opinions, and so we kind of understand where we were all coming from. But one other comment, that when they looked at future growth of the city, even Traynor had determined that he didn't see city administration or staff growing by maybe more than one person, and that would be unless there was something that changed on the horizon that, of course, nobody can foresee what might happen down the road. They just did not see that that was going to be a great possibility, which further understates that if you have a 68,000 square foot building and you're not planning to increase city administrative personnel, then why, and you don't need 68,000 square feet, why are you still content in pushing to stay in a 68,000 square foot building? And that's it. That's all I've got to say.
Okay, is there any further discussion? If not, then our last item is adjournment. So
Mayor,
just
if
go
I
ahead.
could just take a moment of
Sure.
personal indulgence. The City of Independence lost a great friend this last evening in Jerry Bright's death. And I feel a great personal loss, and I wanted to elevate this morning that those of us who knew Jerry and knew how much he loved his hometown and how much he delighted in serving in serving the citizens here with his efforts. I just point to him today as a man of such dramatically good character that in spite of, if you know him well and you knew what his personal battles were, in spite of all of that, he made a significant difference and set an example for all of us of how, if we set our minds to it, we can make a difference. We can make our community better. And I just wanted to celebrate the life of Jerry Bright today in saying that.
Well, thank you for that, because I hate to hear of Jerry's passing. You're right. He is a man that truly gave and was concerned about his fellow brothers and sisters. To see from his heart he was moved, and that's what motivated his actions, was his love for people. I hate to hear that Jerry has passed, but thank you. Why don't we just have a moment of silence in respect to Jerry, and a sign of appreciation for all that Jerry has done for the community. So,
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
thank you. Let's keep the family in our thoughts and our prayers. And there's some big shoes that are going to need to be filled. And I'm sure there's others that can use Jerry as an example and step up to continue his legacy, that Jerry will live on in the lives of the people that he touched. And instead of having one Jerry, maybe we'll have 5 or 6 Jerrys come forward and be the example to others, that his legacy will live far beyond us. So thank you again, Dean, for bringing that to our attention. And with that, then.
Yep. Leonard,
Yes.
Leonard and Dean, thank you very much. I'm sorry to hear the news, too, of Jerry passing on. That was a good tribute, both you gentlemen. Thank you.
So then I make a motion that we adjourn.
I second it.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor of adjournment signify by saying aye.
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 Motion carried.